What happens when a community refuses to let a crumbling, weed-covered elevated railway be demolished, when architects and landscape architects see poetry in industrial decay, and when a city decides that its most valuable real estate should become not luxury condominiums but a public park floating 9 meters above the streets? The answer is the High Line, a 2.33-kilometer linear park built on a historic freight rail line elevated above Manhattan's West Side. Designed by the interdisciplinary team of Diller Scofidio plus Renfro and James Corner Field Operations with planting design by Pete Adolph, and opened in sections between 2009 and 2014. This isn't just another urban park. It's a radical reimagining of what public space can be, a project that transformed an obsolete piece of infrastructure into one of the most beloved and visited parks in the world, attracting over 8 million visitors annually and fundamentally reshaping an entire neighborhood, while inspiring elevated park projects in cities across the globe from Seoul to Philadelphia. The High Line represents a shift in how we think about cities, about preservation, about nature, and about the relationship between infrastructure and urban life, proving that sometimes the most transformative architecture isn't about building something new but about seeing existing structures with fresh eyes and having the courage to propose something unprecedented. To understand the High Line's significance, we need to explore not just the brilliant design that made it famous, but the grassroots activism that saved it from demolition, the historical context of New York's industrial waterfront, the innovative landscape and architectural strategies that guide its design, and the complex legacy it's created as both an unqualified success story and a cautionary tale about gentrification and urban change. Let's start with the history because the High Line story begins not in the 21st century, but in 1934, when the city of New York approved construction of an elevated freight railway designed to remove dangerous street-level trains from Manhattan's largest industrial district. Before the High Line was built, freight trains ran directly through the streets of Manhattan's West Side, in an area nicknamed Death Avenue, because of the frequent accidents involving trains, pedestrians, horses, and vehicles. The situation was so dangerous that the railroad hired men on horseback, known as West Side Cowboys, to ride ahead of trains waving red flags to warn people in traffic. The High Line was part of a massive public-private infrastructure project called the West Side Improvement, which cost approximately $150 million in 1930s money and included 13 miles of elevated track running through and around buildings, with some sections passing directly through warehouses and factories so that goods could be loaded and unloaded inside structures. Imagine a railway that wove through the city's fabric rather than simply running alongside it. For 3 decades, the High Line served its purpose, carrying meat, dairy, produce, and manufactured goods between the meatpacking district, the rail yards, and the industrial warehouses that line Manhattan's West Side. But by the 1950s, interstate trucking began replacing rail freight, and the High Line's usage declined steadily until the last train ran in 1980, carrying 3 carloads of frozen turkeys, which is possibly the most anticlimactic ending for a piece of major urban infrastructure. For the next 2 decades, the High Line sat abandoned, slowly being reclaimed by nature as wild grasses, flowers, and even small trees took root in the gravel ballast between the railway ties, creating an accidental wilderness suspended above the city, a secret garden that few people knew existed. By the late 1990s, the structure was slated for demolition, and property owners beneath the High Line, who saw it as a rusting eyesore that depressed real estate values, were lobbying for its removal. And this is where the citizen activism part of the story begins, because in 1999, 2 residents of the Chelsea neighborhood, Joshua David and Robert Hammond, founded Friends of the High Line, a nonprofit organization dedicated to saving the structure and reimagining it as public space. This wasn't an obvious or easy fight. The High Line was literally falling apart. The city saw it as a liability rather than an asset. Powerful real estate interests wanted it gone, and the idea of turning an abandoned railway into a park seemed quixotic at best. But David and Hammond were persuasive, building a coalition of community members, politicians, designers, and preservationists, and they drew inspiration from the Promenade Planty in Paris, a similar elevated railway conversion that had opened in 1993, proving that such transformations were possible. The breakthrough came in 2002 when the Bloomberg administration, recognizing both the cultural potential and the economic development opportunities, officially supported preserving the High Line as public space. And in 2003, Friends of the High Line organized an international design competition that attracted more than 720 entries from 36 countries, ultimately selecting the team of Diller Scofidio plus Renfro, James Corner Field Operations, and Pete Adolph, a dream team combining architectural innovation, landscape urbanism expertise, and horticultural artistry. Now let's talk about the design concept, because what this team proposed was radically different from a traditional park. They called it agro-urbanism, a strategy that would keep the wild, self-seeded landscape that had colonized the High Line as inspiration while creating a designed public space that felt like a hybrid between nature and infrastructure, between park and plaza, between wilderness and urbanism. James Corner, whose landscape architecture practice had been developing theories about landscape urbanism that treated landscape not as decorative backdrop, but as active infrastructure shaping urban life, saw the High Line as an opportunity to test these ideas at full scale. The design team's fundamental move was to avoid imposing a single identity on the High Line. It wouldn't be purely a garden, purely a promenade, or purely a viewing platform, but rather a sequence of different conditions and experiences along its length, what they called a ribbon of activities. The materiality is crucial to understanding how the design works, because the team developed a custom paving system they called planks, long concrete sections whose width tapers and swells, creating ribbons that weave between planted areas, sometimes widening to create gathering spaces or seating areas, sometimes narrowing to single-file paths that force you close to the vegetation, and sometimes lifting up to form benches or lounging areas. Its paving as choreography, guiding movement, and encouraging different ways of occupying space. These concrete planks aren't uniform gray. They're made from precast concrete with varying aggregate mixes that create subtle color variations and textures, referencing the aged, weathered quality of the original railway structure, while being unmistakably contemporary. The planting strategy, developed by Dutch garden designer Pete Adolph, is equally sophisticated, using perennials, grasses, shrubs, and small trees arranged in naturalistic drifts that change dramatically with the seasons, providing four-season interest. This isn't the manicured, formal planting of traditional parks, but rather a designed wildness that evokes the self-seeded landscape that had colonized the abandoned railway, while being carefully curated for color, texture, succession, and maintenance. Adolph selected over 210 species of perennials, grasses, shrubs, and trees, prioritizing native and adapted species that could thrive in the challenging conditions of an elevated railway with limited soil depth, exposure to wind and sun, and temperature extremes. The structural work required to support this transformation was extensive, because the original railway structure, built in the 1930s, needed significant reinforcement and repair. Engineers analyzed every section of the steel structure, replacing corroded elements, reinforcing connections, upgrading the deck, and adding new waterproofing and drainage systems to prevent water infiltration that could damage the historic structure or the buildings below. The depth of growing medium varies across the High Line from just a few inches in some areas to over 3 feet in planting beds, requiring careful engineering to manage weight loads on the historic structure and sophisticated irrigation systems, since elevated landscapes can't rely on groundwater. One of the most distinctive architectural features is the sundeck at the southern end of Section 1, where a section of track was peeled up and transformed into a tiered seating area overlooking 10th Avenue, creating a built-in amphitheater where visitors can sunbathe, people-watch, and observe the city, its infrastructure turned inside out, exposing the railway's structural DNA while repurposing it for leisure. Throughout the High Line, the design team created what they call viewing frames, large glass panels angled to frame specific views of the city or the sky, turning the act of looking into a designed experience. And these moments acknowledge that one of the High Line's greatest assets is its unique vantage point, offering perspectives on the city that aren't available anywhere else. The High Line also maintains sections of the original railway tracks, leaving them embedded in the new landscape as historical traces, reminders of the structure's industrial past that prevent the park from feeling like historical amnesia. These rails emerge from and disappear into planted areas, creating a poetic tension between past and present, nature and infrastructure. The design integrates access points every 2 or 3 blocks, with staircases, elevators, and ramps connecting the elevated park to street level. And these access points themselves are carefully designed as thresholds that frame your entry into the High Line experience, often using weathering steel that references industrial heritage while providing a warm, tactile contrast to the concrete and plantings. Section 2, which opened in 2011, includes several distinctive program spaces including the 10th Avenue Square, an amphitheater-like seating area with a large window cut into the High Line's edge that frames street traffic below like a live performance, turning the everyday activity of the city into spectacle worth watching. There's also the Wildflower Field, a section where planting is particularly dense and naturalistic, creating an immersive experience where you're surrounded by grasses and flowers that obscure views of buildings and make you forget you're in the middle of Manhattan. Section 3, the final section completed in 2014, pushed further into the undeveloped Hudson Yards area and culminates at the Rail Yards, a section that's more contemplative and less programmed, with a spur that extends into a preserved section of original tracks surrounded by wild plantings. This section feels more like an art installation than a park, a meditation on time, decay, and nature's resilience. The High Line's impact on New York City and on urban design worldwide cannot be overstated, because this project catalyzed one of the most dramatic neighborhood transformations in recent urban history. The formerly industrial meatpacking district in Chelsea area surrounding the High Line experienced explosive development, with luxury residential towers, hotels, art galleries, and retail sprouting up adjacent to the park, and property values along the High Line increased dramatically, which brings us to the complicated legacy of this project. On one hand, the High Line is an unqualified success as a public amenity. It's beloved, well-maintained through a public-private partnership where Friends of the High Line contribute significantly to maintenance and programming costs. It's activated year-round with art installations, performances, and educational programs, and it's made a previously inaccessible elevated structure into one of New York's most democratic public spaces, free to all and used by an incredibly diverse range of people. On the other hand, the High Line has been criticized as an engine of gentrification that displaced longtime residents and businesses, transformed a gritty, affordable neighborhood into an exclusive luxury district, and created what some critics call the High Line effect, where speculative development follows the announcement of elevated park projects, pricing out existing communities before the parks even open. This tension is real and important. The High Line demonstrates that successful placemaking can have unintended consequences, and it's forced architects, landscape architects, and planners to think more carefully about how their interventions affect housing affordability, displacement, and equitable access to urban amenities. The architectural impact is equally significant because the High Line inspired what amounts to a global movement of elevated park projects. Suddenly, cities around the world started looking at their abandoned railways, viaducts, and elevated infrastructure as potential public spaces rather than demolition targets. Seoul's Seoul 7017, Philadelphia's Rail Park, Rotterdam's Hofbegen, Chicago's 606, and dozens of other projects followed, each trying to capture some of the High Line's magic while adapting the concept to their local contexts. Though notably, not all have achieved the same success, which reminds us that great design isn't formulaic. You can't simply copy the High Line's materials and planting strategy and expect the same results, because what made the High Line work was a specific combination of location, design excellence, community support, political will, and frankly, timing. The High Line also represents an important shift in preservation philosophy, moving beyond facade preservation to embrace adaptive reuse that completely transforms the function and experience of historic structures while retaining their essential character. This is preservation as creative reinterpretation rather than static protection. From a design pedagogy perspective, the High Line offers numerous lessons that remain relevant today. The value of interdisciplinary collaboration, because this project only succeeded through the deep integration of architecture, landscape architecture, engineering, and horticulture. The importance of designing for time and change, with Adolph's planting ensuring the High Line looks different every season and even every week, making it a dynamic rather than static space. The power of strategic framing, where the design guides attention toward specific views, moments, and experiences rather than trying to provide everything everywhere. The necessity of materiality and craft, evident in every custom detail from the tapered concrete planks to the integrated benches and water features, and the potential of designing for slowness in a fast city, because the High Line's narrow width and meandering path force a leisurely pace that feels radically different from the rushed sidewalks below. There's something profound about how the High Line invites us to see our cities differently. Walking on it, you're simultaneously in New York and removed from it, moving through the urban fabric while observing it from a privileged perspective, experiencing nature while surrounded by architecture, engaging in the most urban of activities, promenading and people watching, while immersed in carefully designed landscape. The High Line proves that parks don't have to be large green rectangles at ground level, that nature and infrastructure can coexist.